You think of caviar as one of the rarest foods on Earth, a delicacy served in tiny spoonfuls, reserved for the wealthiest tables, priced like a precious metal by the gram. That image isn't wrong, exactly. It's just out of date. Here's a question worth sitting with. When's the last time you actually checked where your caviar came from? Most of the caviar served at the world's most exclusive restaurants right now isn't rare at all. It's mass-produced, on an industrial scale, and it comes from China. So how does a country with no caviar tradition suddenly end up supplying the most exclusive kitchens on the planet? In 2003, a team of former aquaculture researchers in Hangzhou imported millions of fertilized sturgeon eggs from Russia and built a farm on Qiandao Lake, a government-protected nature reserve chosen specifically for its clean, oxygen-rich, temperature-stable water. Why does water quality matter this much? Because sturgeon are brutally sensitive to their environment. Small swings in temperature or oxygen can wipe out an entire generation of fish. So, the site wasn't an accident. They bred Kaluga and Amur sturgeon into a hybrid built to survive and thrive in farmed pens. Then they waited. And waited. Sturgeon takes 7 to 15 years to mature enough to produce roe. Think about that timeline for a second. That's longer than most people stay at the same job. There is no shortcut around it, no clever engineering fix. China's first harvest of farmed caviar didn't arrive until 2006, 3 years after the bet was placed, with no guarantee it would even work. It worked, and it worked at a scale nobody expected. China's total sturgeon production grew from 10,900 tons in 2003 to over 90,000 tons by 2017, an eightfold increase in a decade and a half. One company, Kaluga Queen, now produces more than 60 tons of caviar a year, roughly 60% of the entire world's supply. It stocks 21 of the 26 three-Michelin-starred restaurants in Paris, the very institutions that built caviar's reputation as the ultimate luxury food in the first place. And the price followed the supply down the way it always does when supply floods in. U.S. wholesale import costs fell from roughly $440 per kilogram in 2014 to around $240 per kilogram by 2020, nearly cut in half in 6 years. So what actually changed? Nobody hacked caviar. There was no clever trick. What happened was patient, capital-intensive industrial investment in genetics, geography, and time. A country willing to fund a bet that wouldn't pay off for over a decade, and then willing to scale it once it did. This is what economists call a Veblen good, named after Thorstein Veblen, who first described the pattern back in 1899. Here's the simplest way to think about it. Most things get less appealing to buy as the price goes up. A Veblen good is the opposite. Part of its appeal is the price itself. People aren't really paying for caviar's taste. They're paying for the fact that most people can't afford it. The fish egg is almost beside the point. Which raises the obvious question, what happens to a good like that the moment everyone can afford it? History has already answered this once before, and the answer is brutal. In the 1850s, aluminum cost more than gold, roughly $550 a pound. Picture that. The lightest, most common metal you wrap your leftovers in today was once worth more by weight than the gold in a wedding ring. It was so precious that when the Washington Monument was completed in 1884, its capstone was cast in aluminum and displayed in Tiffany's storefront window before installation, because aluminum was considered a fitting tribute to a national monument. 2 years later, a process called electrolysis, using electricity to strip aluminum out of raw ore, made extraction dramatically cheaper almost overnight. Within decades, the metal that once outpriced gold was being stamped into soda cans and thrown in the trash after a single use. Aluminum's scarcity was never fake. It was a real chemical constraint. The metal is actually abundant in the Earth's crust, but brutally hard to separate out without huge amounts of electricity. The moment someone solved that extraction problem, the scarcity vanished, and the price had no choice but to follow it down. Caviar just lived through the identical story, on a biological timeline instead of a chemical one. But not every Veblen good is this vulnerable. Diamonds aren't, and the reason why is the most important part of this whole story. Diamonds are not and have never been geologically rare. They're actually one of the most common gemstones on Earth. So why have they stayed expensive for over a century when aluminum and caviar didn't? Because what kept diamond prices high wasn't a production constraint at all. It was a company. By 1902, De Beers controlled roughly 90% of the world's rough diamond supply and deliberately metered it to the market in carefully restricted quantities, stockpile by stockpile. In 1947, the company cemented the illusion culturally with a four-word slogan, "A diamond is forever," engineering not just scarcity, but a permanent emotional reason never to resell one. That's the difference that actually matters. Aluminum and caviar had real scarcity, built on a genuine constraint: chemistry, biology, time. Solve the underlying problem, and the scarcity collapses on its own. No marketing budget can stop it. Diamonds had manufactured scarcity, propped up by a cartel rather than a constraint. Nothing needed to be solved because nothing was actually difficult to begin with, which means nothing but real competition or regulatory pressure could ever bring it down. So here's an uncomfortable thought, and I say this with love. If part of your personal definition of making it involves sitting down at a white tablecloth restaurant and ordering caviar, you might want to update your spreadsheet. The scarcity that made that gesture mean something took 14 years and one country's patience to dismantle. The fish is the same. The taste is the same. What's gone is the thing you were actually signaling. And the only reason the bill hasn't caught up to that yet is that menu prices are slow learners. They lag behind the production reality they're supposed to track, sometimes for years, because nobody wants to be the first restaurant to admit the secret's out. So the next time you're tempted to pay extra for something because it feels exclusive, ask yourself one simple question. Is this scarcity real, tied to a constraint that technology or patience could eventually solve? Or is it manufactured, propped up by something other than actual difficulty? Caviar didn't get less delicious. It just stopped being scarce. And unlike a diamond, there's no cartel left standing to keep that secret for much longer. At least let's hope so.